All right, welcome back everyone to Math 154. This is week 5, lecture 2. Remember that you should find all your appropriate due dates in My Math Lab or Canvas, depending on what they are, unless you're catching these lectures live, in which case they are on the screen. So, previous assignments that should still be up are My Math Labs 2.2 and 2.3. We'll be starting 2.4 today, but we will not finish it, which is why you don't see a due date yet. But it will be a week from week 6, lecture 1, technically speaking. So you could go ahead and consider that or write it down if you really wanted to. Excel 2.1 currency is the only Excel file on the horizon at the moment. It's possible that you're still working on BMI, but you've seen that due date in the previous lectures as well as in My Math Lab. And then your next quiz, which will be assigned next class, is going to be based on a guided activity from 2.4. So just giving you a heads up, you'll hear me talk about it for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, but I won't really address it. Again, that will be addressed next class. So please make sure you're keeping up with all your work. Please make sure that you are still reading ahead. Remember, you are responsible for reading the next section's worth of material per lecture. So if you're taking this class once per week, that means you're probably responsible for reading the next 2 or maybe even occasionally 3 sections. And that includes the e-text as well as the notes to share. And again, when I say read ahead, I don't mean that you have to read and study for 4 hours and memorize everything there. It's more about putting eyes on it so that when we address everything in class, it's a little easier since it should be your second time saturating that information. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get into our new section.
2.4 Financial Literacy. So one of the many reasons I like teaching this quantitative reasoning course is that we do spend a decent amount of time. Well, first of all, we spend a decent amount of time using Excel, and Excel is something that many office jobs end up using, and not necessarily in big crazy ways, which we don't do Excel in big crazy ways. We generally just lay some numbers out, apply some formulas, make some charts, and everything's pretty nice. There are certainly jobs that use the crazy, super crazy built-in Excel functions, and you have to learn to be almost like a programmer, but I'm not here to teach you that side of things. So that's one of the reasons I like this course. But the one I was getting to now is that we teach a lot of finance stuff, things that you don't really learn in high school, things that you don't learn in a traditional college math class. I had a lot of math classes in college. I mean, I have a master's in it, so I spent like 5 years studying almost exclusively math and variations of math. And yet I never did 1 ounce of talking about how you should pay or whether you should pay a mortgage off early, get a 15 or a 30-year loan, the formulas behind them, although I did use the idea behind it in other ways. We didn't talk about stocks and bonds and personal investments and pensions and anything like that at all. Now, if you're a business major, I'm sure you get into that. It's pretty obvious that you would get into that. But this is just something that's lacking in a lot of people's lives, and it's one of the many reasons that we have kind of a crisis that 9 out of 10 people can't retire the moment they're supposed to, because all they'd have left is Social Security. They've never put anything into retirement, or they put very minimal into retirement. And some people have pensions, which is a fund your employer sets up and just kind of pays you automatically. But honestly, the way of the pension has gone away. There's not a lot of companies left that offer it, and there's various reasons to that. And it's my personal opinion that a pension isn't that great anyways, especially now that some of these systems have been broken. And we don't need to get into all those details, but doing your own kind of Roth IRAs and 401ks and personal brokerage funds, that's much more the way to legitimate retirement versus just hoping Social Security is going to, let you coast until you're done. Social Security itself is kind of a broken system as well, and I won't get too heavy into the politics of it since this is recorded, but Social Security was set up to help poor people essentially back in the FDR times, and it helped them a little, but it ended up helping rich people more because Social Security, the amount that you earn, is proportional. Hey, that key word that means, as one thing goes up, the other goes up. So it's proportional to the amount of money you've made over your life. So if you're poor, you haven't made that much money, you're not going to get that much Social Security. If you're rich, you've made a lot of money, you'll get a lot more Social Security. Also, statistically, you can look this up and confirm it. Don't just trust me blindly, but rich people tend to live longer on average. So that makes them even more money off of Social Security. That's what I mean by it's kind of a broken system. Also, is Social Security going to be around for another 30 or 40 years? There's a lot of debate about that. Most people say if it is still around, it's going to be at a reduced benefit, like 50 or 75% of what it claims you would make currently. But again, not going to get into anything else past that. Let's just kind of introduce some core ideas. So we're going to talk about stocks a little bit throughout this course, a little bit today, a lot more at the end of the semester. And one thing that you would find in a stock table, and we'll see a stock table today, if we make it on time, I think we will, is a PE ratio. PE stands for price to earnings. P for price, E for earnings. PE ratio. So it's a ratio, it's a fraction of the price. And when they say price, they mean price per share. So whenever you buy a stock, you have to pay a price per share. So for instance, Apple is about $115 a share right now. Amazon's about 33 or 3,400 bucks a share. Maybe it's 3,100 actually. I think it's a little lower. So one share of Amazon costs a lot more than a share of Apple, especially since Apple just did a 4-1 split or 5-1 split, one or the other. Maybe it was Tesla that did the 4-1 split. Doesn't matter. These are irrelevant. I'm talking above a lot of people's heads, I'm sure, and that's not my intention. The point is, stocks have different prices. And it's not always just a better company has a higher price. There are lots of good companies that have much lower prices, and this can be achieved in various ways. But the point is that a company has a price per share. Also, at the end of the year, they can calculate earnings per share. So earnings is your profit. So if you take your total profit and divide it by the number of shares of stock a company has, whether it's 100, 1,000, 10 million, 10 billion, and it's usually in the millions and billions. If you divided those two things, you get the PE ratio. And historically speaking, this has been a good way to measure whether you should purchase a stock or not. Now, this is a way. This is a way. I'm going to highlight that letter A. That's not a highlight, is it? That's blacking it out. Highlight. This is a way to measure whether you should purchase a stock or not. This is not the end-all be-all. I will even speak from my personal investments, which I don't have a lot of, but I don't usually look at the PE ratio that often. I do for some companies, but for other companies, I'm like, I know this is a good company. I know it's going to grow. So I'm going to buy it even if the PE ratio seems out of the correct range. But the simple idea is that if you have too low of a PE ratio, as we will kind of talk about later with an example, it means that the company could struggle. Too low of a PE ratio might mean that the that the price per share is really, really low. And when you have a really, really, really low price per share, like if you're in the dollar range, you can be what's known as delisted. You can be removed from a stockbroker, and then people can't buy or sell the stock anymore, so it just goes to zero and the company goes bankrupt. So if you get too low, it means that your company is basically in a threat of just shutting down. You hear about all these penny stocks, and some people gamble on penny stocks, but that is a really high gamble because a lot of those companies just disappear instantly and you lose your entire investment. Whereas you bet on someone like Apple or Tesla, you might lose money today, you might gain money tomorrow, but Apple's not going to just disappear in a couple of days. Tesla's not just going to disappear in a couple of days. So too low of a PE ratio could have been from the price per share being just ridiculously low, and that means the company could struggle. But also if it's too high, then the price may not be worth the investment. The price per share may just be past the point of worth being investing. So like I mentioned, Amazon's like $3,000 per share roughly. Now, does that mean that you're not going to make money on Amazon? Not necessarily, but it could be an influential factor that people go, well, Amazon's 3,000, Apple's 100. I'm going to buy my Apple for $100 because I've only got $200. Now that mindset actually doesn't really go in today's world anymore. 20 years ago, it was a really accurate statement. But now we have this thing known as fractional shares due to all these other investment companies kind of coming up and making people like Fidelity really have to fight for their worth. So now instead of having to buy one share, you can buy like a tenth of a share or a hundredth of a share. So if you wanted to just buy $30 worth of Amazon, you can with the right broker, and most brokers allow it now because they had to. People like Robinhood came in and changed the game. And I know I'm throwing a lot of these investment names at you, and you'll get a list eventually by the end of the semester of some good ones. So PE ratio is one way to say, well, maybe I'll buy this company, maybe I won't. And it's kind of a porridge situation. There's too hot, there's too cold, and then there's just right. And for the third time, you might see a PE ratio that's just way out of that porridge just right zone and the company's still making money. Or you may see a company have just the right PE ratio and they still end up losing you money. Anything's possible. It's just a historical way of doing things. All right, so that's something having to do with stocks. Oh no, I didn't pull it up. Let me go ahead and take the time to open this. I need the guided activity. I'm just going to pull from the generic one, not our direct course, guided, nope, e-text, chapter 2, guided worksheets. There we go. And then all the way down to 2.4. So there's a few other definitions up here that, again, we don't really test on definitions in this class. That's not the point, but it's a good thing to talk about them. So we talked about PE ratio. We talked about how stock is a portion of a company that an investor can purchase, and they're measured in units of shares. So if you have one share versus someone else owning 10 shares, that person owns 10 times as much of the company. So if that company doubled in value, the person who owns 10 times as much will gain 10 times as much as the other person. Dividends, so stock prices go up and they go down. Some of them go up weeks on end, some of them go down on weeks on end, some of them go all over the place based on the market. They all might kind of do the same thing one day and then the next day. They might go up, they might all go down. But dividends is another way that you can make money off a company. It's not just based on the stock price going up, but some companies pay dividends. So this is money that a company pays out to its shareholders due to earning profit. So if you have a profitable company, say like Amazon, and I use Amazon as an ironic one because they don't pay dividends. So if Amazon was making profit, they could then pay all their shareholders, they could choose to pay all their shareholders some of that profit. And they do a little math to figure out how much they should pay them. Some companies pay lots of dividends because they're very nice. Some companies pay very little dividends because they're less nice. So Amazon in particular does not pay dividends, but there are plenty of companies out there that do. And like I said, some companies might pay 5 or 6% dividends. Some it's like 0.1% or 0.2%. Share is just a unit of a unit used to denote owning a part of a company. Price per share is the price you pay per share. That's a ratio. Price top, shares bottom. So if a company is $10 per share, you wanted to buy 2 of them, means you'd be paying $20. You double the number of shares, you double the price you pay. Retirement plan, this is something that most Americans don't have. That's the true definition. No, I'm just kidding. It's a fact, but it's not the definition. It's just a plan. And it could be any plan of saving and investing money for your retirement after working. The money you save or invest is what you will live on when you stop earning a paycheck. So the idea is you need to build up a big old moat, a big old lake of dollar bills somewhere so that once you stop working, once you start earning money, you can just use those dollar bills to live for the rest of your life. And hopefully you're still investing those so that they're regenerating while you're using them. It's called making your money work for you. And this is something that every one of you should start tomorrow. And I know for some of us that's extremely difficult to do and to consider while we're in college without a job, or, you know, or while we're just making ends meet to pay for 3 kids or anything like that. But there is always, I can't say always, there is almost always a way that you can take $5 a day or $3 a day and just push it to the side and not spend it. There's lots of different ways. You go to Starbucks every day, you spend $5 on a cup of coffee and a cruller or something like that. Well, instead of doing that, go buy bulk coffee at the grocery store, which will cost you about 20 cents a cup instead of $3 or $4 a cup. Most people that go out and buy coffee generally don't get just one cup either. It's multiple cups. Get your little pastry from the grocery store, or maybe even eat a healthier snack. Not telling you how to do things. And if you did that for 50 years, you could have $1 million potentially. And that's not even an exaggeration. We will do that math problem this semester. I think I've already alluded to that. A quarter is just 1/4 of a year or 3 months. And this is basically how a lot of companies will post their projections and numbers and stuff like that, how well they've done. Earnings is profit. Earnings is money a company has made over a fixed period of time. Profit is the same thing. Earnings and profit are pretty much exactly the same thing. So earnings is just also known as profit. Profit is also known as earnings. Earnings per share. So this is just profit per share. This is also an abbreviation, EPS. EPS is earnings per share. PE ratio is price to earnings ratio. So when you see some of these abbreviations, if you know your words, if it's not the first time you've put your eyes on it, then it should sound familiar. And then a stock quote is just, it gives all, I'm not gonna say all, but a bunch of different information about it, like the price per share, what it's done over the past day, how many shares they traded in the past day, what their 52-week range has been, what their high and low has been for a day and a year, dividend, earnings per share, yield, little charts, all sorts of things. All right, so on this screen, you can see that they do a price to earnings calculation for Apple and Amazon. And you might be thinking, well, Mr. Beckner, this guided activity was printed a few years ago, and you were saying Apple is like $100 a share right now, and on this sheet it's 220. So Apple's lost half of its stock price in the past couple of years. And the answer to that is no, because as I just mentioned, they did what's called a stock split, which just makes the numbers smaller, and it's for very artificial reasons, especially in this world, because of fractional share purchases. So before the split, Apple was getting close to $500 a share. It was like $450, and then they split it and it became $125. And it was a 1-to-4 split. It's got to be a 1-to-4 split to make that happen. So if you are looking at this number, this 220, Apple's price per share now is really like 460. But again, there was a split. It's just an arbitrary way of changing the numbers. When they do that, all of the numbers in the past change. So if you consider that split, this number should really be $55. If that all confused you, just ignore it and look at the number and smile. So they say every company has a different number of shares. For instance, 487.7 million shares of Amazon and 4.8 billion shares of Apple. And again, this was the time this was printed. That has changed since then. Fewer shares can contribute to a higher price. Every company makes a different amount of profit per year. This is reported as earnings per share. So the EPS, earnings per share, for Apple was $11.53, and for Amazon it was $11.01. So they seem like they're pretty close. They're earning about $11 per share of the company. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing that they're close to each other. But what we can do is we can take those values along with their price per share, we can do a ratio of them and see what their PE ratio comes out to. So we take the price per share, which they said down, I thought they had it up. Yes, they do. They have it up here at $220.65 for Apple. And then we're going to divide it by its earnings per share, which was $11.53. You can see that done right here. You would just jam those in a calculator and you'd get 19. Amazon, however, Amazon had that very, very high price of $1,800 roughly per share. And then the earnings per share was $11.01. And when you divide those, you get 162. So you can see that these two numbers are wildly different. One of them is about 20 and the other is about 160. Now, one of those is about in the sweet spot of buying, the other is not, and yet both of them were extremely profitable companies for the past 2 years and the past 8 years before that as well. They just keep making lots of money. A lot of people talk about how you should have diversified stocks and bonds and everything for your investments. I know of a couple people that basically just invest in Apple and Amazon and ride that to the bank. I'm not telling you how to invest your money. I'm saying there are many different theories, but these two companies in particular keep growing. Maybe they'll stop one day, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll take over everything. We don't know. Amazon sure seems to be doing a good job of that. But again, the fact that PE ratio of 20 and 160, what this is saying is that people are paying 162.5 times what Amazon earns per share versus only 19 times per share in Apple. So the idea there is that people are overvaluing Amazon in one way because they're paying 162 times what it's earning, whereas Apple's only paying 19 times what it's earning. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the company can't just keep kicking butt and making people scratch their heads and going, why is this still happening? But it's a traditional way. So I will just go ahead and spoil this. This 20 number, this 19 number is a lot closer to the porridge, the sweet spot. This 162 is way out there. It sounds a little ridiculous. So obviously people think Amazon has huge growth potential to pay this much in its shares, and they just keep proving that they do. Because again, at the time of this printing, it was at 1,800, and now I'll pull up my stock ticker on my phone. Now it's at about 3,200. So it's almost doubled since this page was printed a couple years ago. That's insane. Okay, so here's what a stock ticker looks like, or a stock quote. Some people call it the ticker, some people call it the quote. Again, I don't really care what you call things. It's not super important to know the deep, detailed names. It's understanding how to use them and apply them. So, the PE ratio is one of the most common statistics used to assess the value of a share of stock. Again, it's not the end all be all, it's a way. We will discuss this stuff more in chapter 9, but for now, we're just going to kind of go with this PE ratio idea. And I'm going to need to do this, and then let's just pull up this. That looks pretty good. Okay. All right, so price. Now, this is not super well labeled. It just says price, but more technically, it should be called price per share. But a lot of these don't say price per share. They'll just say price. So that's the price you would pay for one share of stock. Then we have change. So over the past day, it went up 0.17. So that means it went up 17 cents. Then it shows that change as a percentage. And we're going to start learning how to calculate percent changes in chapter 4. But for now, we're just going to take it at face value that it increased almost 1%. This says that 8 million shares were traded. In that day, they were traded between 28.23 and 28.43. So at one point, it was a little higher than what it closed at. At one point, it was a little lower than what it closed at. But ultimately, it went up 17 cents from open to close. Beta, we're not going to talk about. This 1 year percent change says it's gone up about 10% over a year, which is pretty good. Nobody's going to complain over making 11% on something in a year, especially when your savings accounts are getting you like 0.5% right now. That's 0.5%, not 5%. Price to earnings, so this is the literal PE ratio. The X, you kind of ignore, it just says it's 8. The earnings per share, or EPS, is 3.55. Dividend and yield, so the dividend says they're paying $1.72 per share, which is 6.06% of a dividend yield. These two numbers are actually tied to each other, and we're going to show that. And they give you a chart of the past year. If you're online, you can change this to a day or to a decade and all sorts of different ranges, depending on what app you're using, what site you're using. All right, so getting to the point, they ask us to, number 1, compute the ratio of the price per share to the earnings per share. So they ask us to make a ratio. So they want us to make a fraction, and they want us to do the price per share in the top to the earnings per share in the bottom, and then they want to scale the second quantity to 1. So for number 1, we're doing the price per share to the earnings per share. That's how we're setting our fractions up. It's going to be price per share over earnings per share. But we're not just going fraction over fraction, because they say to scale this. To scale means to set up a proportion. So what we'll do is we set a fraction equal to a fraction, where the left one will have the numbers from the table, the price per share and the earnings per share. What's the price per share? That's the 28.40. The earnings per share, use your eyes. Oh, that's this, right? No, it's not that. Oh, it's this, right? It's the beta. It's definitely the beta. No, it's the thing that says, pay attention, earnings per share. Earnings per share, and that number is 3.55. How did I know what the price per share was? I used my eyes and I paid attention. How did I know what my earnings per share was? I used my eyes and I paid attention. But then they said to scale the second quantity to 1. What's the second? Top or the bottom? It's the bottom. It's first in the top, second in the bottom. So when they say to scale it to 1, that says to put a 1 there. It doesn't say, this is not what it says. It doesn't say just turn the 355 into 1. Scaling something means to build a proportion and to scale the specific number to 1. If they had said to scale the first quantity to 1, then I would have done this instead, but that's not what they asked. Oop, too far. There we go. So with that being a 1, that means we can call this any letter we like. We're going to call it x. How do we solve this? We cross multiply. When we cross multiply, we'll get 28.40 times 1 equals 3.55 times x, which is just 28.40 equals 3.55x. Then we're going to divide both sides with 3.55 to solve for x. Again, you've got to know how to do your very, very simple algebra, which says that when we do that division, let's pull out a calculator. Oops, C for calculator, which has happened. I've never seen that screen before in my life. I hit my mouse scroll wheel and that happened. So now I know 28.4 divided by 3.55. And we get 8. We get 8. So 8 is equal to x. What is x? X is the ratio of the price per share to the earnings per share. The price per share to earnings per share. The price to earnings. Price to earnings. Look right here. Look in the guided activity where I'm hovering over now. Price slash earnings. That means price on top of earnings. We calculated it to be 8, and the table actually said that to begin with. So if you understood the words and everything, you might have been able to just say, well, it's 8. We're doing price over earnings, so they told us price per earnings is 8. But guess what? That's exactly how the table finds this. Now, do their calculations have to do it this way? No, they could have set up a y equals kx scenario and found it that way. That would have also been perfectly valid, because all of these things in this table are proportional. All right, so number 2, the earnings per share or EPS statistic is the ratio of the profits the company made, earnings, profit, remember those two words are interchangeable, but we don't like to go profit per share because that would be PPS, and that's price per share. It would be the same abbreviation for two things. So that's why people really like EPS for that one. Earnings, profit, interchangeable words. So let's use E so that we don't have the same abbreviation twice. That would be extremely confusing. So the earnings per share is the ratio of the profits, aka earnings, the company made for the previous 12 months, for the previous year. That 12 months not going to have anything to do with the problem, to the number of shares. Earnings, shares. Profits are earnings, shares are shares. So we're doing profits divided by shares, or earnings divided by shares. The word per means the second thing is in the bottom. If there were 5.9 billion shares available, use the EPS statistic given to compute the profits that AT&T made. So this company's profit margin is not in this chart or table or whatever you want to call it anywhere. It's not in there. There's nothing that says the company's profit. But if we know how many shares of the company are available and we know the earnings per share, we are able to calculate this. So let's write out what this says. The earnings per share is, so this is number 2. The earnings per share means equals in math. Is always means equals. So the earnings per share is the ratio, so I'm going to make a fraction, of profits or earnings to the number of shares. So it's earnings, aka profit, over the number of shares. All right, over 12 months. I don't see anything having to do with time here, so let's not plug that 12 anywhere in. They tell us that there were 5.9 billion shares available. That's also not in this table. I've always felt like that's something that should be in the table. They say how many shares were traded over the previous day, but not how many shares there are total. So there was 8 million traded yesterday, but there's 5.9 billion, so that's about 1,000 times more available. Well, that's one of the numbers that goes in this. There were 5.9 billion shares. That's the number of shares. That's this bottom number. That's the 5.9 billion. So I'm going to take this thing and just rewrite it. But instead of number of shares, I'm going to write 5.9 billion, which would be 5,900,000. So this looks like 5.9 million, so I need 3 more zeros. Know your millions and billions, that'll really mess you up here. That was the number of shares. It was told to us inside of the problem. The question they have is, compute the profits, compute the earnings. That's this. They have asked us to find this thing because it's unknown. It's not just staring us in the face. That's what we can call our X. And you go, well, hold on. How do I do this division if there's an X here? Well, they said to use, why does that not work when I use my pen? Use the EPS statistic. They gave us the EPS. The EPS was 3.55. So this number right here is 3.55. So this is actually an equation. 3.55 equals X over 5.9 billion. How do we solve X divided by a number? We multiply. So we need to multiply, and I'm going to abbreviate this for space, 5.9 billion, 5.9 billion, multiply, multiply. So that the 5.9 billions cancel on our variable side, giving us just an X. Let's pull out our calculator. Why did I close it? That was silly of me. So let's see, 5,900, and then 6 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the 3.55. Let's see if this gives us something not in scientific notation. Good. So we get 20.945 or 20.945 billion. So 20, 945, 000, 000. X is a dollar amount because it's profit, so that's 20 billion, or you could say 20.945 billion. In the real world, nobody cares how you express your numbers. My math lab would ask you to write it in billions or to write all the zeros, so just pay attention. So this company over the past year profited $21 billion, roughly, just rounding it out. Now, profit is not just how much money they made. Profit is the difference of what they earned and what they paid. So you have income and expenditures as a business, and profit is the difference of those two things. It's the difference of money coming in and money going out. But this 21 billion number, this would be one of the values the company would base off of if they were going to give out dividends. So if they said, all right, well, we're going to share 1% of this with our stockholders. So they take 1% of this and then divide that by the number of shares and then give that to everybody who owns a share. Okay, so if you owned 1 share, you would get, let's say you did all that math and you've got $1. So if you own 1 share, you get $1. If you own 100 shares, you get $100. All right, problem number 3. This is going to seem like a big detour for a few minutes. The importance of this problem is way outside of just this relationship here. This is going to talk about a very core idea of math. When you have fractions, if the top goes up or goes down, it causes an effect to that final ratio. When the bottom goes up or down, it causes an effect to that final ratio. That's what we're actually going to be studying for this problem. But we will use that study and give it the specific language for problem number 3 in the end of it. All right, so what am I rambling about? The share price changes constantly as people trade shares with each other. If there are more buyers than sellers, the price goes up. If there are more sellers than buyers, the share price goes down. And this is pretty much how stock works. So if 90% of people out there are trying to buy stock, it means that the people selling are like, nah, I don't really want to sell. I want to buy more right now. That drives the price up because demand is high. The demand to buy is high. And you can see the same effect in the real estate market. Or if everybody's got a bad feeling about the stock market for the day or the week or the month or the year, then maybe everybody's trying to sell and unload their stocks. But if everybody's selling, who's going to buy? So if everybody's selling, and if you've got 90% of people selling and 10% of people buying, they're going to go, nah, lower that price. Nah, lower that price. And that price is going to drop and drop and drop. Okay, so that's a nice idea. If there's more buyers than sellers, price of stock goes up. If there's more sellers than buyers, price of stock goes down. The point of this whole problem, though, is what are the 2 different ways the PE ratio can increase? Question number 3 doesn't even need any of the sentences before what I currently have highlighted. What are the 2 different ways the PE ratio can increase? Now, this has nothing to do with any kind of deep financial analysis.
Some quick video editing because Word crashed on me there. Oops. And here we go.
We're doing something known as what-if analysis. This is something I mentioned that Excel is amazing for because we can just quickly type a number and see what happens. We can type another number and see what happens, or we can create an entire table of numbers and see what happens, kind of like that BMI table. Hey, if you're this weight and this height, what's your BMI? If you're this height and this weight, what's your BMI? If you're this height and this weight, what's your BMI? If you're this height and this weight, what's your BMI? It's the same idea as when we had that car loan where you're looking at like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% loans and taking that loan for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 years or whatever that range was. If you do this, what happens? If you do that, what happens? So we're just going to play with a bunch of numbers at a time. For this particular problem, we are going to set up a fraction with numbers we choose. See what the answer is. Then, so this will be our baseline. So I'm just going to take 2 numbers and I'm going to divide them. Maybe 100 divided by 5 and I get 20. Or 100 divided by 10 and I get 10. Whatever that number is, I'm going to hold on to it. That's going to be the thing I compare to every time. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the top. So then we will play with the top. One time, make it bigger than the original top. Time, and I got to hit enter. One time, make it smaller. One of these scenarios, what we desire. What do we desire? We desire the PE ratio to increase. So let's ignore the whole idea of PE ratio. Let's just say we want the ratio to increase. We want the answer to go up. So what we desire is answer to go up. So we've just come up with our own two numbers, one for the top, one for the bottom. 100 divided by 5, or 100 divided by 10, or 1,000 divided by a million. It doesn't matter what they are. It's just a baseline. You get an answer, and you hold that answer, and you say, you're my baseline. You're what I compare everything to. Then you take the top number, make it bigger one time, see what the answer changes to. Make it smaller one time, see what the answer changes to. Okay, so that's scenario A. Scenario B is we'll play same way. And one of the scenarios is what we desire, to make the whole thing go up. Then make a statement about which things gave the desired answer and relate to PE ratio. So I'm going to start with two things. What's PE ratio? It's price and earnings. So I'm going to start with a price of, I said 110, so let's go with that. $100. And let's say earnings or profit for $10. This is just me making up two numbers. If this was normal class, you'd be in groups doing this. This does not bode well to a discussion board, unfortunately, so you're just going to see me do it instead. And I really don't like that, but it's something we need to see. But I would really appreciate it if all of you, which will end up being like 3 of you probably, and I just know that, if you tried this on your own, you, instead of using 100, maybe you say, I'm going to use 50. And instead of using 10, maybe you use, I don't know, 20. It doesn't matter. Come up with your own numbers. Sorry for that. So then our PE ratio would be 100, because that's the price, to the earnings, which is 10. And 100 divided by 10 is 10. And I'm going to put this in a different color. This is our baseline to compare. Yes, I know it's coincidentally the same as the earnings. Do not take that as any kind of important factoid. If you don't like those being the same, do 105 and then you'll have a 20 here. Easy way to fix things. So this is our baseline. So now what we're going to do is we're here. Then we're going to play with the top. So in this 100 over 10, I'm going to one time change the 100 to a bigger number. Then I'm going to one time change that 100 to a smaller number. So in a different color. So let's go with, so this is us playing with the top. Let's make it one time a price of, let's go smaller first. It doesn't matter the order, but let's make this the price 50 now. So that the PE ratio is now going to be 50 over 10. 50 divided by 10 is 5. How does that compare to the original baseline? 5 is smaller than 10. Is that what we desire? We want it to increase, so no. So that's not what we want. So that was making the price smaller. We went from 100 to 50. I could have gone from 100 to 99. I could have gone 100 from 90. I could have gone from $100 to $1. don't think that that half the problem is figuring out what this number is. Just make a smaller number. Don't overthink it. And that's what everybody does in class in the group work. They go, well, I don't know what to do. Where'd you come up with 100? How do I figure out what number it should be now? Make it up. We are making this up as we go by. All right, so this was me making it smaller versus the 100. Now let's make it bigger. So now let's change the price to, I don't know, $200. You could make it $300. You could make it $517.45. I don't care. Nobody cares. The point is, does the answer get bigger or small? So now we're not looking at any of this anymore. That's all done. The price is 200. The earnings is still 10. So we're doing 200 divided by 10, which is 20. Now I'm not comparing to this. I'm not comparing to that. I'm comparing it to the baseline every single time. 20 is bigger than 10. So this was bigger. Is that the result we desire? Yes, it is. We were trying to make the PE ratio increase, which means bigger. So this is one of the scenarios. Making the top number bigger made the answer bigger. Making the top bigger makes the answer bigger. That's the conclusion for the top. Now let's do the bottom. So for the bottom changing, now we're not changing the price anymore, we're changing the earnings. Now the earnings was originally 10, so one time you need to make it smaller, one time you need to make it bigger. Mr. Beckner, what number should I make them? Should I make them 9? Should I make them 8? Should I make them 7? Yes, make them 9 or 8 or 7 or 3 or 1 or 0.02. I don't care. Make it smaller than 10 one time, make it bigger than 10 one time. Don't overthink this. Do something, don't stare blankly at your paper. All right, so earnings is what we're changing. Well, what do we make the price? Do we go with the 50 or the 20? We are disregarding, we are ignoring all of this now. We're going back to the baseline scenario. So we have to use the 100 for the price. So it's 100, I gotta write PE first. PE be the 100 for the price. That will not change in either scenario. Now one time, let's make the earnings smaller. Let's go from 10 to say 5. I'm just picking numbers that I know will divide evenly and quickly. 100 divided by 5 is 20. Now again, we're not looking at any of the red ink. You're ignoring that. You're just comparing the 20 to the baseline of 10. Is it bigger or is it smaller? Well, it's bigger, obviously. Now, let's make the earnings small. I thought I wrote the 5. I must have erased it accidentally. The earnings was 5. Shoot. There we go. Now, instead of going down in comparison to 10, let's go up. Maybe 15. How about 20? I like 20. Let's make the earnings 20. So that makes its PE ratio now, the 100 does not change, but the bottom does. The bottom changed to 20. 100 divided by 20 is 5, which in comparison to the 10 is smaller. Now ask yourself, do you feel, I'm just kidding. No, not do you feel lucky. Which one was it supposed to be? We were supposed to make the thing go up. So this was the scenario we wanted to happen, which meant we wanted the earnings to be going down in comparison to the baseline. So by making the bottom, and this is going to seem weird, but smaller, that's what makes the answer bigger. This is an extremely base idea of mathematics. When you have a division, if you make the top bigger, the answer's bigger. If you make the bottom smaller, the answer's bigger. So the top can increase or the bottom can decrease. And it's those two factoids right there that have everything to do with direct and inverse proportionality. Some people think we're done. We're not done. We have not actually answered the question, what are 2 different ways the PE ratio can increase? All we've done so far is said making the top bigger makes the answer bigger, making the bottom smaller makes the answer bigger. We need to use the appropriate words. We've got to be quantitative reasoning students. So what we say is, by making, instead of saying by making the top bigger, what was the top? It was the price. And we're not just going to say by making the price bigger, we're going to say by the price increasing. That would make the PE ratio bigger. That's one scenario. Or the other way this could happen is by making the bottom, which we call earnings, or by the earnings or profit, aka. Give myself one more line. Oh, shoot. This is so frustrating sometimes. So by the price increasing or by the profits decreasing, the PE ratio can get bigger. Let's just say can increase. This is the ultimate answer to number 3. If the price per share of the stock goes up, then the PE ratio goes up. Or if the profit goes down, the PE ratio can increase. This statement shows you why there's kind of a sweet spot. So if your profits go down, your PE ratio goes up. What if your profits go down to like $1? Your PE ratio is going to be ridiculously high. But that's probably not a good thing, right? Because your company has only made $1 over the past year. You're probably about to bankrupt, probably. So that's why it sounds like you'd want your it sounds like you'd want your PE ratio to be super high, but not really, because it could mean that you've got low profits, or it could just mean that the price per share is just ridiculously high. So then you might go, oh, okay, well then I want the PE ratio to be ridiculously low, because if it's ridiculously low, that must mean that the company's got a ton of profits, because you're dividing by a big number to make this small. Well, that could be the case, but then the cost per share could also be proportional to that and just kind of cancel it out. So when your PE ratio is too low, it could be one of two effects. It could be that the price per share is way too low, which if you're in the penny stock range, you could be going out the window in a couple of days. Or it could be that your profits are ridiculously high, which is not a problem. So that's why there's kind of a sweet spot. All right, number 4, before we move on to the next page, make sure I got lots of space. I don't want that issue happening again. Compute the ratio of the dividend to the price per share and scale the second quantity to 100. So we're not scaling the second to 100, we're scaling it to 1. So number 4, the dividend to the price per share. We're doing dividend, use your words, to the price per share. So that's how we know what to set up. We're scaling something so we know it's a fraction equal to a fraction. The left one should be the dividend and price per share we extract from the table. What's the dividend? It's 1.72. Use your eyes. What's the price per share? It's 28.4. Use your eyes. Then we're scaling the second quantity to 100. Well, remember, when we scale things to 100, that's kind of turning one of these things into a percentage, basically. And then there will be our x. We're going to cross multiply. I'm just going to go ahead and show that 1.72 times 100 is 172. And then you'll get equals 28.4x. You will divide both sides by the 28.4. There we go. And then when we do that calculation, we will get a familiar number, 172, divided by 28.4. 6.05, blah, 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 blah. Let's just round this to 2 decimal places, so 6.06. So x is equal to 6.06. Now we scaled that to 100, so this is essentially a percent. Look at this right here. I mentioned this at the beginning of the problem. The dividend and yield were related to each other. So a dividend is based on a per share, whereas the 6.06 is if we were thinking of it as a percentage. It sounds a lot nicer as a percentage because when you see 1.72, you go, well, I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot. But 6.06 as a percentage does. But that's because this 1.72 is scaled to the price per share. When you convert it to a percent, though, you get 6% roughly, which again is a solid dividend. And you see a lot of the companies like energy companies and telecommunications that offer higher than usual dividends because they have money coming in constantly. Everyone's going to keep telecommunicating. We're going to keep using our internet and our cell phones. We're going to keep buying gasoline and fuel for our homes and vehicles. All right. Question 5, definitely not finishing this section, by the way, which is what I anticipated. The following graphic found in Peter Schiller's book, Irrational Exuberance, displays both the PE ratios for the entire stock market and long-term interest rates. What would you estimate the average historical PE ratio to be? So this is a table of information that's got two completely different sets of information on it. So the way that these numbers over here are scaled in comparison to these numbers over here, a human or a computer has made that choice. Now, especially when it's a human, they might make a choice to, maybe instead of this one being 18, maybe they want this to go up to 36 so that that graph is kind of shrunken in comparison to the other one. Or maybe they want this to be a height of 9 and have 18 all the way over here to make it seem more exaggerated in comparison to the other. When you've got scare tactics in the media, you see this all the time. I was looking at an article on the news the other day that had one of these. And if I can backtrack and find that article, I'll email it to everybody. But it had something where one of these things just looked like it was super, super scary. And you can probably imagine what I'm talking about. If you just look in the Virginia Pilot every day, there's a statistic, a graph that's up there. But not every day do they have both sections of it. Some days it's just one piece. Some days it's this other thing that kind of looks like this, and then it dips drastically. Anyways, there was a human being that chose how to scale those two things to each other to make that graph that they don't always show super scary looking. So that's one bad thing about having a chart like this, because there's choice made to, they wanted these two things to be at these scary high peaks. Maybe someone else goes, I don't want to intimidate people so much, and I want to have this blue one way up here and the red one down here for whatever reason. I don't know. It just depends on the problem and how evil the person or group of people are. Point of this problem. The following graphic, blah, 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 displays PE ratios, so those are in blue, and long-term interest rates that are in red. How can you tell? Look at the colors of the words. What would you estimate is the average historical PE ratio? So the PE ratios are based on the left numbers where it says PE ratio. So this is about a 20, this is about a 25, this is about a 32, 33, somewhere like that. Up here at 2000, it's about 45. Then we had the stock market crash of 2000, the internet bubble, all those tech stocks just went down really hard for a while, a long while actually. And then we got some recovery. Interest rates, kind of in the 10 ballpark, then they kind of start dropping down to 5 in the 40s, and then they start spiking. Now, they started spiking in the 70s because of the fact that we went off the gold standard, so our dollar weakened immensely, so we went from having something known as inflation. The inflation rate went from like 4 or 5% on average to like 17% every year, so long-term interest rates kind of followed that. But then as things normalized, we got down to much lower rates on average, and now we're seeing really, really, really low long-term interest rates. Anyways, point of the problem. What would you estimate is the average historical PE ratio? We're not even looking at the red thing, we're just looking at the blue thing. Ignore the red thing. So here's what you're doing. I'm gonna pull up a new, I gotta go off of Annotate actually first. There we go. So let's do a new one of these. What I'm going to do is, this is the idea. They want us to find the historical average. And this is actually a concept, come on, that involves calculus. Well, you're not calculus students, and I'm not going to teach you calculus. What I'm going to teach you is how to eyeball things. So this I'm going to use as like a piece of paper covering something up. The idea is if I find the historical average, so if I put my piece of paper, I'm using the top of this border right now, so I'm putting this at a height of 25. The idea is that if I see the top half of this above 25, if I see roughly half of the blue ink, and then if I look at the below part of it, so now I'm covering up above 25 and I can only see below, if I see half of the blue ink, then that would be the historical average. So again, I'm trying to find the height at which if I look at the top, I see half, if I look at the bottom, I see half. So maybe you think that height is 40. Well, I barely even see any blue at all, so it's definitely not 40. And if you look at below it, so there's my 40, I see pretty much all of the blue. So 40 is too high. Maybe you think it's 10. So here's me only looking at above 10, and I pretty much see almost all the blue. If I look below 10, I hardly see any blue at all. So definitely not 10. If you look at 20, I see a decent amount of blue. That's not bad. That's not bad. I seem to see all the spikes, I feel like. If I look below 20, I don't know. I feel like I see a lot more blue below it, so I wouldn't say it's 20. And I'm not asking for you to go into 16, 17, or 12.5 or anything like that. Let's try 15. If I look at 15, okay, now we're getting some blue above. Now we're getting some blue above. I see a decent amount above. This might be it. This might be it. So below. And I still see a decent amount below. Maybe a little less than what was above, but this is as close as it's going to get for us. That is absolutely as close as it's going to get. So the historical average is about 15. So this is saying about 15 for the historical PE ratio. So that's the magic porridge number that we were talking about, that we like our companies to be close to for that historical, they're going to have good long-term growth. It's not too crazy high consumer demand like Amazon or anything like that. Again, not the end all be all. Plenty of people have made millions off of Amazon, probably even billions, right? Definitely billions, in fact. Number 6, if a PE ratio rise, what seems to happen to long-term interest rates? This is not definitive, but they're pretty well related to each other, especially if you look at the long-term peaks and the extremes. So here's an instance where the blue is going down and the red seems to be going up. Here's an instance where the red seems to be getting ridiculously high and the blue almost bottomed out. Here's another instance where the blue goes super, super high and the red seems to start bottoming out. So based on kind of the peaks, I would say these are inversely related. So for number 6, what I would say is, as PE ratios rise, long-term interest rates tend to fall. It's not a definitive statement, but they do seem to be inversely related. And this is not the PE ratio of one stock. This is the average PE ratio of all major stocks. All right, like I said, this is one of those group work activities I really love doing in class. It does not work at all as a discussion board. And I tried doing group work the other day in another class, and I don't think it went very well, so I'm keeping to the discussion boards, as I may or may not have said recently. Okay, so we got a couple minutes left. Let's keep going with this. So all we've done so far is just this, but that is half the section, believe it or not. Maybe even a little more than half. Yeah, I'll say a little more than half. Okay. So CPI, this has nothing to do with stock. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say it has nothing to do with stock prices, because inflation can be an effect of stock prices. But this is just something completely different for us. Consumer Price Index. So one year you go to the store and you buy a loaf of bread and it costs $1, and the next year you go to the store and your loaf of bread costs $1.10, and the next year it costs you $1.25. One year you go to the store and you buy some hamburger meat and it's $4 a pound. The next year you go and it's $4.50 a pound. The next year you go, it's $5 a pound. One year you go to Starbucks and you buy a cup of coffee and it's $1.50. The next year you go, it's $2. The next year you go, it's $2.15. The next year it's $2.20. The next year it's $2.70. Prices increase. And prices don't just increase out of pure greed. I will say for a lot of companies, that's certainly a factor of it. But prices increase because we are constantly inflating as people. We are growing. We have more people every day, every month, every year. So because there's more people, and initially the dollars might not go up, there's less dollars to give to them, so there's higher demand for the dollars. So then we print more money, but by printing more money, we weaken the value of the dollar. So we make more people, we make more money, it causes the entire system to do what we call inflate in general. Not always. Stock crashes, really weird things going on historically, they can cause what we call deflation, where consumer goods actually go down on average. But when we talk about a CPI, we are talking about on average. So every year, these big group of, we'll call them nerds, they get together and they analyze the price of tons and tons and tons and tons of things in the market. And they look and say, all right, well, the price of fruit went up. All right, the price of meat stayed the same. Starbucks coffee went up. Oh, the price of milk went down for whatever reason. Because not everything goes up. Sometimes things go down for various reasons. Technology, those prices tend to go down. Think about 1995, a computer was going to cost you like $2,000. If you bought that computer nowadays, it would probably cost you 50 cents because it can't even do anything. But just in general, the price of computers as technology's gotten better have gone down. So better technology, lower prices. So technology kind of goes against inflation quite often. But again, inflation is looking at everything as a whole. So they'll say, all right, for 1995, the CPI number is 170, something like that. I'm just making up a number in the ballpark. And they'll say, all right, for 1990, the CPI is 130.7. For 2005, it's 195.3. I was looking at numbers for those. And that number is used to calculate the price of a good in 1990 versus 2005, or the price of a good in 2020 versus 2010. Now, if that good is priced exactly to inflation, then they would be exactly the same price ultimately. But again, quite often, a good in 1990 is going to be more expensive or less expensive than the good in 2005, even when you account for inflation. Now, generally, things go up. Generally, when you're comparing 1990 to 2020, almost everything will have gone up in price. Again, computers, technology, kind of the oddball there. But that doesn't mean that they went up proportionally. So what we're going to be doing next class is we're going to look at some things like, oh, a Starbucks cup of coffee in this year versus that year, or a Starbucks cup of coffee in Europe versus America. And they all use proportion tables. It's all the exact same thing we were doing at the beginning of chapter 2. It's fraction equal to fraction. It's cross multiplying. It's understanding that you can have gaps and that the gaps don't affect you. You just need 4 corners where 3 of them have numbers and the 4th is unknown. So we're going to be doing that next time. That is going to be what your quiz is going to be related to, but I don't want to spoil the problem yet. But we'll save that for next time. So